Say it though.
Welcome. Hello, everybody. My name is Marsha McLean, and I am the number one grandma of Grandmas 2.0. I'd like to welcome you all to our show today. Our show is called the 2.0 Grandma Podcast, and the show is about grandmas, for grandmas, and by a grandma. Today, it is my pleasure to have on our show Mr. Gregory Payne, and I like to call him Greg, if that's okay with you, Greg. And we're going to talk about what it is to be a cool grandpa. So let me tell you first, when I found out about Greg and his work, I thought, a cool grandpa and Grandma's 2.0, we need to connect. So he's going to tell you all about what he's doing and how we connected and anything else he wants to share with us. All right. So welcome, Greg.
Well, thank you so much, Marsha. I really appreciate being on your show. This is a great opportunity for us to, figure out what grandmas and grandpas are doing and share notes on this wonderful role that we get to embrace.
Yes.
So I think a little bit of background about me is it's going on about 4 years or so. I was made a grandfather. I didn't have a vote in that experience at all, but it's all wonderful. And my son and my daughter-in-law presented us with that news, and I started scratching my head around what's this role of grandfather like, and I had a great grandfather relationship, and I know people that have had good relationships with grandfathers, how important that is with them. But it seems like we don't hear a lot about that role other than maybe in TVs and movies and sitcoms, where typically a grandfather is the butt of a joke or, a villain even. And in the context of those things, they're fine. I laugh with those all the time myself. The crazy grandfather that's doing something off in the corner, hilarious. I get it. But there's so much more to that role than just being comic relief for the family. And I wanted to explore this role and figure out, how can I be a cool grandpa? How can I be that person where my grandkids start talking about me and they're like, oh, my grandfather is so cool. We did this and we did that. And, I had that experience. So that's the basis for me starting this Cool Grandpa podcast.
Wow. I like to refer to this grandparenthood as the grand life, because it's so grand because we didn't necessarily choose it, right? But it's a different kind of parenting than when we were like first base parenting, if you understand what I mean, It's totally different, but yet it is the grandest of all. It is the best.
It is. And
it really is the best.
I love to think about it in terms of, when we're parents, we're in a very tactical situation. We've got to think about the mortgage and the diapers and the food and the friends. And, we're on the day-to-day in the dirt kind of mentality. And then as grandparents, we can step back and be a little bit more strategic. And we can start to think a little bit about, hey, if we plan this experience down the road, what kind of an impact is that going to have on the grandchildren and the adult children, right? Because we're still parents. We're still wanting to jump in and help out and solve problems and do those things. But now we've got to think a little bit more strategically, or I should say we get the opportunity to think a little bit more strategically as grandparents.
Whereas before we were just thinking on our feet, basically, right?
Absolutely. We're that short order cook in the back of the restaurant that's just frying up eggs and grilling this and grilling that and getting stuff out the door.
Yes.
And now we can think about the menu, and let's say.
And as some says, and I don't know who said this, but I think it's someone in the grandparent collaborative that was talking about intentional. We can be more intentional, like you say, strategic, but intentional is a word that comes to mind as well. I it's a great role. It's a grand role. It really is. I mean, I love it. I enjoy being a parent as well, but this is like almost like the Oscar role, if you will, because you can do it. You can pull back when you want to, or when you need to, or when the parent says, "Okay, I have this. Don't worry about it. You take second base or whatever on it." But you can do that. And then if you want to do something that's not related, you can do that as well. And then you can always, continue to build that relationship with these children that, you may not be in the same house with you or whatever. And so it's almost like my granddaughter said, "Grandma, you're my best friend." I just loved it. And she was probably about 8 at the time. And I said, "You know what? You're my best friend too." But it was such a beautiful, beautiful relationship. Oh my God. There's nothing like it. But anyway, there's nothing like it. Now, as a grandpa, you're right. I see grandpas like you said, sitting over in the corner, not really engaged. But you're talking about a new thing, a new way, a different way of being a grandpa. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I just go through my life and my experience. I'm Generation X,
Hmm.
and the grandparents that we had and the models that we had, these were all folks from the greatest generation or silent generation, and they were moving out of that Victorian role of a grandfather writes a check, they're in the background, they support. It's a grandma thing. Let the
Right, right.
and I think that we're the generation that grew up with Van Halen and with rap music and grunge and all these and BMX racing and street bike riding,
Hmm.
all these different things. Like, why not carry that energy into this relationship of being a grandfather? Why not take more of a step into this thing and make it a fantastic role, that it's not just the exception where you're talking at lunch or dinner with some friends and one person says, "Oh, I had this great relationship." Why not make it to where 4 out of 5 of those friends all say, "We had great relationships with our grandfathers. Our grandfathers really were, front and center in our lives and in the family." So that's kind of where the energy and where I'm trying to tell grandfathers, like, "Hey, we don't need permission to be out there. We don't need permission to have adventures with the grandkids or provide emotional support and do these things that so many of the kids growing up nowadays really need from that male role model." And it's
Hmm.
not to say grandmas aren't important and that female role models not important, but it's like, hey, you know what? We've got a great resource here. Let's not sit on our hands. Let's get active. Let's get in the game. Let's make sure that these kids growing up have every advantage that we can give them from what we
Hmm.
can provide.
Hmm. Yeah, I hadn't thought about it from that perspective, but as I think about my husband and his role as a grandfather, yeah, it is kind of a back seat. It's like, he'll say things to me or to the grandkids, "Well, ask your grandma," or, I don't know, let's see what grandma wants to do. It's like he doesn't really have an opinion about it, or he thinks he shouldn't have an opinion. So you're saying, yes, you should have an opinion. Matter of fact, maybe you should be the one that's initiating this instead of waiting for grandma to do it. Yeah. I love that. I like that because I think it does change the role. It changed how society sees the grandpa in this role. And that's one of the things that, I'm passionate about for grandmas 2.0. It's like I want society to see us as a little bit differently. So I always say that grandmas are invisible, and basically that sounds a lot like what you're saying. Grandpas are definitely invisible too, within the role in the family, how we see them. And so you're changing that. Your goal is to change that. I love that. Yeah. I
Uh,
like that because I think that's something that we have in common. So yeah. Yeah. So I wanted to, like I said, when I first heard about the cool grandpa, I was like, the cool grandpa and the grandma's 2.0, we need to get together and figure some things out here. But I saw this as such a great way for us to talk and again, bring both grandmas and grandpas together, center stage, to kind of figure out, okay, what is our role and what do we want our role to be in this relationship as the quote unquote new era of grandparents, right? Because we're doing a new thing. We're not doing like our grandparents were. So and we're kind of, for me anyway, I know that I'm kind of developing it as I go, as I see, or what I think it should be, based on, how society sees us. And I wanted to kind of dispel all those myths. And it sounds like you're talking pretty much about the same thing, and or the same way, looking at it from that same perspective.
Oh, absolutely. I want to make sure that grandmas know that if grandpas are sitting on their hands a little bit, give us a nudge. You know,
Yes. Yeah.
get get us out there a little bit, because
Yes.
I think sometimes too grandpas can sit there and we don't always vocalize our dreams and our ambitions for those relationships with the grandchildren and with the adult children, right? Sometimes it's like, boy, it would sure be fun to pack the kids up and go to the amusement park, but we're waiting for grandma to say something, or we're waiting for our adult children to plan the trip. And I want to be, hey, grandpa, go plan the trip, throw it out there, at least as an idea, and then
Mm-hmm.
get everybody together. And then if that's what you want to do, go do it.
Mm.
I want us active and planning and communicating what we want that relationship to be, because I think we miss out when we don't talk to our spouses, the grandmas, and we don't talk to our adult children about what's the relationship I want to have with my grandkids? How do I want to support them? And get that input about, hey, what do you got? What do you need me as grandpa to do? How do you need me to show up and step forward into that role?
Mm-hmm.
Use me. I'm a support, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
let's
Mm-hmm.
let's get that communication going, and let's get that action moving.
Mm. And I wonder, and I hadn't thought about this until right this moment, but I wonder if that comes from even the relationship that we have with our spouses, right? In the household, it's usually the woman that's, leading the charges about everything, right?
Right.
How to do this, how to do this, when we're going to go, all those things. And so that could be that it's just we've kind of conformed to that role. And even though now our roles are different because now we're grand, in our new role, but we just kind of, conveniently kind of fall into place. And we're basically saying we're disruptors.
Yes,
Exactly.
absolutely. Because I think it's and you bring up a great point, right? Because every household, everybody falls into some kind of a role.
Yes.
Somebody takes care of most of the domestic decisions. Somebody takes care of the outside the house decisions. You may work collaboratively on
Mm-hmm.
these things, but somebody typically has a lead in these things.
Mm-hmm.
And I think becoming a grandparent's a great opportunity to reset a little bit of what
Yes.
those roles are, and to really make sure that your voice is heard. I want to make sure that my wife and what she wants as grandma is being heard, and I would like that she's asking me and prompting me to get out in front and communicate what I want out of being a grandfather.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we're changing roles here. We're doing something a little different. Like they say, we're disrupting what we usually do. You know, and that's pretty fascinating when you think about it. I really hadn't thought about it from that perspective that much until right now, as we're in this conversation. And so I'm curious about what listeners think about that, because as we're all in our own, like you say, you're Generation X, somebody might be baby boomer. We're all different in different eras of our lives. But when we think about it, I think we have to be really intentional about what that role should be, and then come out of our comfort zone, right, and do things a little differently. Yeah, and say, okay, yeah, so as the grandpa now, I want to make sure that I'm thinking of some of the things that we want to do. I know I told you about our grand trip that we take every year, right?
Right.
And
Yes.
typically, what I do is I let, now that the grandkids are a little older, I let them decide where we want to go. I encourage them to, use some decision making skills, look up the places, think about what we would do while we're there, all of those things, right? And then typically, my husband and I, we do the logistics, like, renting the car or renting the Airbnb or whatever, that sort of thing, right? And so, even with that, we could possibly change the roles. I could get him to start talking to them about it earlier, and, getting, and I wonder how he would do it, because he has a military background. So he might do it totally different from me. I never thought about that right now. But yeah, so yeah, just changing those roles up a little bit. You never know. And most of the grandkids are boys, right? So
Right.
that's another thing. I hadn't thought about that as well, and maybe putting him in the charge, or to take the lead on it, and then just see how it all turns out. And I
Yeah.
promise I won't criticize. But it, I'm joking.
That's one of the big things when we kind of shake things up a little bit. We do need to kind of bite our tongues a little bit and let things play out, because
Yes.
one of the things that I think came up in our discussions in this grandparent collective group that we're members of is this idea that we could be grandparents for maybe close to 40 years. I mean, with the way life expectancy and everything else works out,
Mm-hmm.
we could be grandparents a lot longer than we are parents, at least parents to, let's say, 18 and under, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so with that, why not shake up some of these roles that we might have been, let's say, stuck into or have fallen into, and shake things up a little bit and see what happens with that relationship. And I'm not saying stress anybody out. I'm not saying
Mm-hmm.
make us uncomfortable, but if my wife is always making the plans for where we go for the holidays.
Right.
Which kids are we seeing? Well, why not just kick it over to me? Let's see what happens.
Yes, 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 yes. That's what I'm talking about. Now, see, you've encouraged me, Greg. I think I'm going to do a new thing this year. I'm going to say to my husband, I'm going to say, I want you to think about how I want you to kind of take over planning the grand trip this year. You get with the kids, do all that stuff. I'll see what he says. I'll report back, let you know what he says. And then I'll put you on the phone with him. Okay, guy, look, we're trying to do something new here. But anyway, so Greg, I want to hear all about your podcast, the Cool Grandpa's podcast. But before we do that, we need to take a little break, a little commercial break. And that's going to be about maybe 30 seconds. And then we'll come back. I don't want to hear all about that. I want to hear about some of the guests you've had, and, what you guys talk about, that sort of thing. Okay?
Perfect.
All right. Thank you. All right. Thank you. Okay, Greg. So now I want to hear all about your podcast, the Cool Grandpa's podcast. Tell me whatever you want to share with us. But I do want to hear about some of the guests that you've had, and then tell us what the premise is of the show.
Sure. So, like I said, a few years back, I had these questions about what it is to be a cool grandpa. What's a really great grandpa? What does that look like? And I thought one of the best things I could do is just go ask a bunch of other grandfathers. And so initially, I just started out where I wanted to interview grandfathers. And what I wanted to learn was not, here's 7 things you have to do to be a great grandfather, but I wanted to listen to great grandfathers talking to me about what is it that they do? What are some of the little things that they do? And I was doing that. And then I branched out into talking to adult grandchildren. So it would be somebody like you, where it's like, hey, tell me about your grandfather. What did your grandfather do? What were some of the memories that you built with him? What were some of those things that really have impacted you that happened when you were 10 years old, and now you're
Right.
years old,
I like
And
the way
then,
you said that.
how come you still remember that, of all the things that really impacted you? And so that was a great opportunity. And I do both of those things. And then I wanted to expand a little bit more and talk to experts that were dealing with issues around grandfathers, about men aging. And I didn't want to become just a men's fitness podcast or a men's mental health podcast. So I sprinkle all three of these things, I feel, within the podcast. So I'm talking to people about how do we help kids with depression? How do we help kids with anxiety? What do we need to do with that? And then talking with people about what are some ways that men, as we get older, how do we stay connected and build our networks? Because one of the biggest challenges that adult men have is our networks shrink and our depression increases at the same time. We retire from organizations where we have a lot of work buddies and work friends. Typically, we may not be playing softball like we used to because of aches and pains and getting older. And so we lose these friends along the way. And so part of that was, how do we get grandfathers to get back involved and get into networks and support ourselves? Because I really feel that if I'm going to be of value to my family and my grandchildren, then I've got to be a person of value. And to do that, I have to be taking care of myself. And it's partly a selfish thing, but it's partly not a selfish thing, right? Because if I'm depressed and I don't have any friends, I'm not getting out and having my own adventures, I've got no emotional energy and physical energy to pour into my kids. And so I talked to all these people on the podcast about this, and the goal is to make sure that when men and women are hearing this, that they're being able to take something away. And it's not a, hey, this is how you have to be a grandfather, because everybody's relationship and circumstances are different. But it is some things where hearing a grandfather say, you know what, I treated my granddaughter just like any of the other grandkids. I expected her to be out throwing bales of hay, just like the boys. I expected her to be doing these things. And then when I'm talking to an adult grandchild woman, and she's like, you know what? He expected me to throw bales of hay. I was on the back of the flatbed stacking those hay bales. I was doing these things. I felt like I could do anything and I could keep up with anybody. Mm-hmm. And we never know how these circumstances and what we do as grandfathers are going to affect people. And we always talk about, you can't plan a quality experience. So sometimes you have to go with the quantity and let the grandchildren pick out the quality pieces, right? And so it's been fascinating. One of the great guests that I've had were three granddaughters who worked on a book together. Their grandfather was the leader of the 1st Marine Division in World War II.
Oh my!
He died before the end of the war, but he had all these diaries and all this information. And like anybody else, right? Your grandfather doesn't have to be, Marine Corps general, but we've all got these trunks and crates of family history up in attics. Well, these three women decided to go through all that, pieced it together, and then created a book about their grandfather. And it's somebody that's well known in history, General Rupertus. And he was in those early battles in the South Pacific, in Guadalcanal and Saipan, and in all those early battles that were so bloody in World War II. And then, like I said, he passed away before the end of the war, so they never knew him. Mm-hmm. But they put this book together, and it was fascinating to talk to them about that experience, about how the sisters all came together to write that book.
Wow.
And then, being able to talk to other grandparents and grandfathers that did grow up with their grandfathers being very standoffish and in an era of children are to be seen and not
I'm
heard.
not heard. Yes.
You go to that room and I'm in this room, and having
Mhm.
that formal relationship. And then as grandfathers themselves, having flipped that over on its head and being grandfathers that will get down and play with the granddaughters and get down on the ground and play with the grandsons and play Hot Wheels and do all these things. It's really interesting to hear those stories and hear how men can change things up. You know, we may have had a role model that was one way or didn't have a role model at all. And
Mhm.
then with a little
Mhm.
bit of intention, we can change that whole script and be that person that our granddaughters and our grandsons, when they're so many years old,
Right.
you know, think back.
Yeah, that is true.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's so true. Like you said, being intentional about it, and even though no matter what your own experience was like, you can change that around. Yeah, you definitely change that around by just doing some things, intentional things yourself. And like I said, getting down on the floor with them, playing with the girls, not just the boys, playing with both, just engaging them in some things so that they have these memories of being with my grandpa, my grandma, whatever. Yes, that is so beautiful. Yeah,
mm-hmm.
and you're right. I think it takes intentionality to do it, though, and that's some of the things that. And if we get out of our own heads and think about, not think about what the role is, but just think about the memories that we want to leave them with. Yes, that
Yeah.
they can cherish. Yeah, that's a beautiful thing. Yep. I really love that. So now you've had I love that story about the colonel or the
Uh,
military person
it was
and the
a
three
general.
daughters. Yeah, I
Uh,
love that. I love that story because so they did you say that they had some experience with their grandpa, or was it just the
no,
stories that they found?
so their grandfather died of a heart attack. Um, I think early in 1945, before the end of World War II.
Oh, okay.
And
Okay.
their father was only 5 years old at the time, so
Oh,
they
so they
never.
didn't know him.
Nope.
But they knew him through that book. Oh, what a beautiful thing.
Which adds that other layer to it, right? Because it's like,
Yes.
it's one thing if you knew your grandfather really well and he passed and had a great story to tell, and okay, I'm taking this on to tell the world. It's
Uh-huh.
another thing when you know he wasn't around. They didn't have interaction with him except through his diaries and
Right.
pictures. And
Oh, that is beautiful. Yeah, so you get to so yeah, they got to live it, but through the stories that were left behind about him and not necessarily firsthand. Hmm. But they got to know him
yes,
through that. Yeah, so that's beautiful as well. It's not the ideal way, of course, but it's a way to get to know. So that tells me that that's something that we all need to do, is to write some of these things down that we want to share with our grandchildren. Make the memories, but then also write the memories and capture them in pictures or whatever, so that they can have those memories, and then their children can have them as well. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Yeah, I love that. So now tell me, Greg, what is something new that you're about to do? What's the future of the cool grandpa?
Well, I got a couple of things going on. One is I just had my children's book published.
Ah,
So now I'm out there, beating the bushes and doing what I can to promote that.
uh-huh.
And then I'm also developing a course that's going to be part of Grandparents Academy about
Okay, okay.
intentional grandfathering.
Yes.
Turn grandfathering into a verb. I don't
Yes. Yeah.
know. But it is to encourage people to jump into this role, embrace it. We come
Yes.
from this awesome background of shaking things up. I mean, every generation does, but I really feel like Generation X, we either did it or we went through it.
Uh-huh.
And so why not shake this role up as well? So those are two things that I've got going on in the near future. And then I'm just continuing to reach out to awesome people to get them on the podcast so we can continue to learn and tell stories and really
Yes.
grow this movement, similar to what you're doing.
Yes. So now tell me the name of the book.
The name of the book is My Grandpa's Grandpa.
My grandpa's grandpa.
And the basis of this book is, you know how when you put little kids to bed and all of a sudden they start asking 20 questions and
Yes, because they don't want
they
to go
don't
to
want to go
sleep
to sleep.
yet. Right. Yes.
So the basis of this book is I'm putting my grandson to bed and he starts in with 20 questions, but the 20 questions were, hey, did you have a grandpa? Because, to a 4 or 5 year old, we're as old as dirt. And,
Right.
the mountains weren't even here when we were little kids. And so the idea that my grandfather had a grandfather is a little strange. So we go through and he asks some questions about my grandfather growing up as a little boy and what did he do and did he go to college and what was life like with him and those sorts of things. So it's a fun little way to hey, communicate that these family stories are important, as well as communicating a little bit that, hey, grandfathers, we're family historians. We know we can reach back almost 100 years or more in our family's history. Even if we don't know all of it, we know some of
Mm-hmm.
it. And
Mm-hmm.
be able to convey that to our our children that may not have asked, or even our grandchildren.
Okay. Well, I'm excited. I can't wait to get my hands on the book. I'm excited that you're going to do the course with the Grandparents Academy, and I think that that course is one that is definitely needed because, like we were saying earlier, that role of grandparents, grandfathers, I think needs a little tweaking, a little change. Yes, yes. So I'm excited about that, and I think you're the best person to share that, with people. So tell us how you can get in, how we can get in touch with you, your social media, websites, all of that information.
Sure. So the website is cool-grandpa.us. And so from there, you can kind of find all the episodes for the podcast. You can find the book. You can find, anything you need to know about that. And then I've also got a Facebook group that's I'm just kicking off. That so you look it up on Facebook. It's the Cool Grandpa Podcast, and it's a private group, but you can go in there and you can request to join, and I'll let you right in, and then we just share all sorts of good stuff about being grandparents in that group. And yeah, so those are probably the two best ways to connect with me.
Okay, great. Thank you, Greg. And I want to thank you so much for this opportunity to talk with you again. This conversation has been eye-opening. We've had conversations before, but this one has been eye-opening as well because I now learned a whole new level of what you're doing, and I respect the work that you're doing. I think it's definitely needed. And again, I want us to stay in touch so we can do some things together. So again, thank you so much for your time. And this is our episode number 10. So thank you for that's a milestone, as you know. So
Yes.
thank you so much for that. And this is Dr. Marsha Carter McLean, the number one grandma of Grandma's 2.0.
Thank you so much, Marcia. I really
Thank
enjoyed it.
you. And I'll see you soon. Thank you for listening too.